All right. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for making the time during your lunch break. And thanks so much, Centaur, for giving us the opportunity to present on AI powered dentistry. And I'm really looking forward to kind of sharing my story with you guys. It's been a pretty wild ride for the last couple of years, going from a practitioner to this crazy journey I'm currently on. Yeah, like to share a little bit about how that ended up happening. Yeah. And I think another interesting thing to share with you is what happened to the practice, like going from a full-time practitioner owning a practice, going into this founder CEO role. There was a huge, brutal sort of transition. Loads of mistakes made, which I'd like to share with you, and also some interesting wins as well in reducing this like sort of key person dependency, which is, I think, an interesting things for those of you that have multiple practices or starting a practice or even just looking to optimize your existing practice with some new tech. And lastly, I'd like to share with you something that's deep in my wheelhouse at the moment, which is the future of AI in dentistry. We're going to have a couple of polls towards the end as well with a couple of business case studies, and I'd love to get your participation in that. So let's get to it. So here's a story of how I kind of ended up running a tech company. Wasn't in my life plans, but somehow it happened. Graduated in Otago, New Zealand, Mighty Aotearoa, 2007, and just worked in New Zealand for the first 4 years of my career. In rural New Zealand, actually, in the Horowhenua Kapiti region, which is like just north of Wellington. Fairly underprivileged population, tons of, caries, and it was very much volume-based dentistry, family-owned practices as well. So just real lovely employers as well. Just a very nice start to dentistry. Around 2011, we moved to Australia, my wife and I, to Melbourne. And I think that was quite an interesting sort of stark difference from very rural family owned dentistry to coming to Melbourne City, and just like the difference in mindset, I guess, in terms of ownership and the competition, how difficult it is to attract patients and ultimately sort of like, run a successful business. So I was an associate for a few years. And that kind of transition had always jolted me going from rural New Zealand to and a few things that kind of stuck with me from those times is trying to hit sort of financial metrics, X number of crowns per month. And I always kind of felt uncomfortable with that sort of thing, and it wasn't the reason I got into dentistry, but increasingly, like, had to get off the high horse pretty quickly because it's a survival thing, right? Like, you need to practice ethical dentistry, but you also need to make sure you have a viable business, or if you're an associate, contribute to the viability of the practice. Um, so anyway, around 2014, started my own practice. This is obviously a CPR day, but it kind of felt like this is what I was doing to the business as well, trying to breathe it into life. Foolishly started the practice in Melbourne CBD, so super competitive. And that first year was pretty tricky, like trying to attract new patients, trying to give them a great experience so word of mouth would spread. But yeah, somehow or another, we kind of got through that super tricky first couple of years, and the practice really started to grow in the coming years. Around 2017, 18, we had four chairs and four rooms and multiple practitioners, and yeah, it was a good practice, right? Like and it still is. So then something interesting happened around 2018. I think I started to get itchy feet. Just being on the tools full time. It was, it's really important, I think, to put into practice what your interests are. But I think my deep interest, it turns out to be, was more like this diagnostics element of dentistry rather than doing the doing. I just love the idea of researching this topic called clinical decision making. How did this come about? There's a couple of books, Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, and this is a guy called Charlie Munger. He's Warren Buffett's business partner. So both these books had a pretty big influence on me. And the common thread there is, how the hell do dentists or any human come to decisions? because we kind of do it intuitively. We don't often think about thinking, but Kahneman's big insight is sometimes we do these things intuitively, which is like rapid fire sort of decision making. You see I don't know, an abscess on a PA or an OPG. It doesn't, we've got the training and we've got the experience. We intuitively say this is going to be a RCT or extraction. It's not checklisted decision making, which is the other sort of thinking, which is system two thinking. Yeah, so this kind of like balance of system one, system two, and the fact that us as practitioners, we're making like irreversible decisions on patients. Hey, I just met you. I'm going to drill a hole in your tooth or take out your wisdom teeth. Trust me, right? It's going to be fine. So that kind of got the fire burning. And then I met a couple of Melbourne Uni professors. Both of these guys are on our team, Rowan and Nicola. So what we started to do was apply some of this like general principles on decision making into dentistry. And there's some research in medicine, but there's not that much research into clinical decision making, which is diagnosis, treatment planning into dentistry itself. So we started to publish some papers, and we still continue to do so. But it became pretty apparent around 2020 that there are kind of interesting tech solutions to this. And I was pretty keen to, you know, not just research, but also kind of bring this tech element into it to put some real the theory into practice. So this is my co-founder at CoTreat, Nikki Nee. So we probably see more of each other than we do our partners at the moment, and it's been that way for some time. But he brings this like web development, AI, and tech expertise into our domain expertise, which myself and Nicola and Rowan and many of the other domain people in the company has. So we've currently got about 17 people on our Slack channels. And I would say, yeah, a third are researchers, a third are AI and web developers, and a third roughly are practitioners like myself. So it's an interesting company where there's lots of different minds that contribute to do something. But what is that thing? So the thesis is for the last like 500 years, ever since I guess Da Vinci drew accurate sketches of teeth, or the official sort of Enlightenment sort of era got into doing dentistry in a scientific way. Diagnosis, treatment planning, patient communication, this has all been in the domain of humans. But it's kind of crazy that all of a sudden the technology is there at a societal level for this to no longer be the sole domain of a human being. And it still kind of like shocks me that this is possible, but increasingly as data and technology becomes better and better, I'm pretty damn convinced that large elements of diagnosis, treatment planning, and even patient communication can be done through AI. And got to keep in mind this doesn't have a provider number. It can't diagnose cracked tooth syndrome because it's got so much symptom. There's a lot of stuff it can't do, but I'm genuinely surprised at the level of like the things it can do. And then that's an interesting place to kind of find ourselves as a profession. Cool. So that's was kind of the thesis. That's why we started the company. But around 2022, things kind of got serious. Um, an investor, sorry, that's my dog barking. I don't know if you can hear the little guy. Sorry, I might just grab him just 1 second. This is Oreo. Gonna keep him on my lap. So around 2022, it was a patient. So back from COVID, I'm back on the tools, trying to get the practice up and running again. And as I do, I just like chat to nearly everybody I meet as to what we're trying to do, both from a research perspective and from a tech perspective. And this guy, I can't reveal his real name, but let's call him John. I've been seeing John for ages, and he's the guy I kind of think I like to talk about books with John. I know his wife, I know he travels a lot, but what happened was John just loved what we're trying to do. And he said, if you ever want to pursue this seriously, call the family office. Um, we're interested in investing. So it kind of gave me this like opportunity, I guess, to get some capital behind the idea, build the team, and give this thing a proper go. So that was in 2022. But oh yeah, and also got to say, Dental Windows and Centaur, at the very early stages of the idea, these guys have been like incredibly, incredibly supportive, which is absolutely fantastic because large company, small company, like it's just fantastic. Like the innovation mindset and the partnership and the trust and the support that these guys have given us, it's been really instrumental in our development. So thank you, everybody. So here's a scenario. It's 2022, post-COVID, work from home, um, you know, real tricky sort of business climate for getting the practice up and running again. Plus, all of a sudden, this like new crazy wild possible wild goose chase of taking the seed capital and becoming near full-time founder CEO of a tech startup. So really tricky, right? Like you had to chat to the Sri Lankan parents that you saw earlier in the photo, and they were like, you have a beautiful practice, done really well over the last 8 years to build it up. Why risk it all to now chase this other thing? And the key thing was like, sorry, the word key I think is important because it's a real key person problem. Um, Most of the revenue in the practice was myself and my second in command, Casey. He had to move back to Queensland as well because had a baby, needed family support. So all of a sudden, practice post-COVID Melbourne CBD is like apocalyptic. I'm gone, Casey's gone, and the practice is now like 4 rooms with one hygienist and a bunch of DAs and receptionists. So yeah, it's like great for co-trade. I've got some money to hire people and give that thing a proper go, but all of a sudden the practice is like pretty screwed. Um, yeah, so got to build it up from nearly scratch. Part of the caveat of the investment was I can't like work very many hours as a dentist. Like I said, I'll have to maintain my registration, therefore I'll have to work X number of hours. And they were eventually comfortable with that, but even that took a little bit of negotiating. What's worthy of their capital is worthy of, the founder's full-time attention was the narrative. Yeah, so anyway, practice 2022, post-apocalyptic, loads of dumb things. So I've done so many mistakes trying to get this practice to run by itself without me. That hopefully some of you can learn from these mistakes. So imagine, let's say, for argument, it was we were our revenue was like 1.2 or 1.3 mil when I was there, but all of a sudden it's like, nosedived. What did I do? I increase expenses. So I was like, somebody's got to be there and lead the practice. So hire a practice manager. It was great from like an operations perspective. Like it was less headache for me, right? Because I could focus on co-trade. Practice manager would do the operations and kind of help with that. But as good as he was, just couldn't build the revenue up quickly enough. So that was an issue. Mistake two was hiring a treatment coordinator. So similar mindset. Hey, let's grow the revenue again. We've got these amazing dentists and staff that are working for us. Let's try grow revenue by hiring a treatment coordinator. But similar thing, just couldn't grow revenue fast enough and when compared to the expenses. So I know this is going to work for some practices, but just for my scenario of that key person disappearing, neither of these two I could get to work. Um, throw money at Google and Facebook ads worked somewhat, but man, that was, still hard to find margin when, a lot of your profits or it's going towards Google or Facebook ads. And it just felt like it was competing, like competing to, and that's kind of never a great mindset in my eyes. So without to say the obvious, FY23 wasn't amazing for the practice, but this is the problem, right? Like it's that key person dependency. There were some systems, but the more I realized, I was kind of like, you know, the person that was holding everything together. And we pretty much had no choice, even though CoTreat was initially meant to like solve this diagnostic problem of better decision making, that sort of thing. I pretty much had to get one hand to wash the other. And it was obviously a great opportunity for CoTreat as well to have another business model, but the main motivator was to solve this key person problem and to find a way to get the practice to run. That so it didn't have like a super high dependency on me or the need to add like significantly to payroll. Yeah. So when you break it down, I guess a key person in a practice will set the culture for that practice, which is all around patient experience. And at a practitioner level, this is where the diagnostics obviously kick in. The ability to be objective about what's in front of you, whether it's images or whether it's actually assessing the patient, and then creating a treatment plan. Some of the practitioners that I had hired had some, there was a couple of new grads at the time, and there's been a ton of development since, but in the early days, new grads particularly, I think, struggle with communication, where they want to, discuss their the patient's needs and bring up elective options. I don't want to use the word sales because I think it is a yeah, we're practitioners, right? We're not trying to sell overtly, but communicating in such a way that that the patient sort of wants. Firstly, they understand what the need is, they understand what the benefits are, and then they will come to accept it. Cool. So a lot of doom and gloom, but surely some things worked, and luckily it did, both for the practice and co-treat. Um, so number one, standardizing diagnosis. Um, the way I like to think about diagnosis and treatment planning is they're kind of like two sides to the same coin. Um, After the last like 6 or 7 years of being so deep in this stuff, I think my position on diagnosis is there shouldn't be that much variation in diagnosis. Um, like that old trope of a patient going to 10 different dentists and coming out with 12 different treatment plans. I get that. But when it comes to diagnosis, I think there is almost such a thing as objective truth. So based on imaging, based on what we see in the patient, I think there is more or less like truth when it comes to diagnosis. This is caries or bone loss or whatever. And like I said earlier, there are subjective things that has to come into this as well, like patient symptoms or probing depths or patient's desires. So there's a lot of stuff when it comes to the treatment planning side of it, but I really think that diagnosis should be quite objective and we shouldn't be getting 12 or 13 different variations of the same patient depending on who looks at the case. Um, yeah, so I'm more convinced than ever that diagnosis should be very, very consistent. Treatment planning, however, I think there's always a range of acceptable, depending on your philosophy, depending on the patient's desires and needs. So at CoTreat, what we've decided to do was, so if you go back to this one, you got the diagnosis, and what we're slowly doing is marrying up treatment modalities for any given diagnosis. So, for example, of stage one perio, what are the different item codes or ranges of acceptable for this? And in the case of stage two, it's a slightly more item codes are potentially acceptable for stage three, slightly more again. So what we're looking to do with CoTreat is come to the diagnosis using AI, computer vision, That's kind of mathematical diagnosis. And then once you figure out what the diagnosis is, what are the potential treatment options that that might be in the range of acceptable? And we'll have ideally a top treatment code, and then the practitioner will be able to click it and select which out of the range of acceptable that they want to prescribe to the patient. So mathematical diagnosis, algorithmic treatment planning. That's the vision, and that's where we're slowly going. Uh, Other things I think that can be standardized, and we successfully have done this in the practice, and we've got 30 or 40 other practices that are doing this case presentation piece with CoTreat. So rather than relying just on that in-person conversation with the patient, which I think is hugely, hugely important, right? And there's no better opportunity than to educate and present the case in such a way that the patient will accept that treatment plan when they're there. But I don't think there's any harm. In fact, I think there's great benefit of sending some written information, the patient's images, even like the SDL scans, as a follow-up to that appointment. You can send it to them while they're in the chair, kind of go through the pathologies, the benefits. And it just like when the patient has this on their phone, what we find through the data is they keep going back to it, going back to it. And ultimately that helps with case acceptance greatly. But from a service design and kind of like practice point of view, it really helps standardize the workflow. So if I have two or three different practitioners, I want a similar experience for the patient. And I think this is what was, I guess, the key person. Like they set the culture when they're there, but can you use technology to set workflows in such a way that the different practitioners will do more similar things than not? Uh, so that word service design, I had no idea what this actually meant up until a couple of years ago. So if you think about product design, think of Apple, Steve Jobs, like designing meticulously every single detail of his Apple products, but services also need careful design, and this is big in like hospitals or various work various services where health is obviously one, or tradies, for example. There's tons of different ways that you can set your workflows. So one thing that we've discovered at CoTreat is this is actually kind of like going back to first principles of economics of division of labor. Who does what, right? Like us practitioners sometimes do everything. And I think prior to CoTreat, I was doing a lot of this stuff myself, whereas it's pretty feasible to delegate some of these things to DAs, like taking photos, even taking Cert 4, taking bite wings, providing, there's a good decision tree or a referral from a practitioner, right? There are details to all this, but I think the high level idea here is practitioners can like focus more on doing the treatment, communicating with the patient, and doing the things that only practitioners can do, but get the DAs well trained to fit in at the start and potentially at the end of the patient experience. So this worked for my practice, but this is not going to work for everybody, right? It depends on the philosophy and the time allocations and stuff like that. But I think taking service design seriously is one thing that really helped the practice. So this is a slightly crazy idea, but I know people are already doing free Invisalign consults, but I think through optimal service design and potentially something like CoTreat helping, I'm not going to use the word diagnose because I don't think AI can diagnose, that needs a practitioner, but an AI can certainly screen or triage. So potentially you could advertise Invisalign or implants or I don't know, whatever else it is that you want to do, free consults or no gap or low cost consults. The patient could potentially come in, spend the majority of the time with a well-trained DA or treatment coordinator or whatever, take the data, chuck it to CoTreat, and then we can take that initial analysis off the practitioner's hand. And yeah, so the practitioner can kind of have more time to do what they can do. So yeah, CodeRate does a bunch of stuff. AI can do even more, right? Like we're just kind of scratching the surface in a few areas, but I think it's just a really interesting time to be a practice owner, and I think we have to pay attention to this over the next 10 years. Um, yeah, so I'm now of the belief that key person dependency can be combated. It's not easy, and I think every practice is so different that there needs to be a deep analysis of the current situation before trying to figure out what the potential solutions for automations and standardizations might be. Um, that's my two boys and wife. So being founder plus practice owner, it leaves very little time to family. There's a saying that like doing a startup is like chewing glass and staring into the abyss. And it definitely feels like that sometimes. And I think the same goes for starting a dental practice or starting that second location, third location, or even just like in this crazy cost of living crisis, keeping your revenue and keeping your margins. So it's really tricky time. So I think we've got to keep exploring these new developments to kind of survive and thrive in this new climate. So I'm going to throw a few sort of ideas at what I think the future of AI might be in dentistry. So to me, this is a no-brainer, and this is kind of what we're betting the farm on, that diagnosis and treatment planning can absolutely be automated somewhat, at the very least, be like decision support so practitioners can perform more efficiently and more accurately. We've also started to demonstrate that patient communication can be automated somewhat. So just got to imagine like a little chat bot or something on your website. Potentially that digital treatment plan that CodeTreat can send out when a patient asks questions. Eventually, there will be an AI in there that can answer questions about dentistry quite accurately, drawn from the evidence-based. Eventually, things like AI agents will be able to make a booking for a patient right from the website or from that digital treatment plan. So there's a lot of interesting communication pieces. Education, obviously, like educating patients what a root canal is, what a crown is, all the things we take for granted. I think the patient will be able to pull information and it can be scientifically delivered to them through generative AI. Note writings, I think, a super obvious one, where there's a couple of friends of ours. One's called Heidi Health. I think Lyrebird Health is the other one that's starting to do this. So kind of like how a Google or a Alexa listens, what these companies are starting to do is they're starting to listen to the consult and transcript that. So they're called medical scribes, I think is what they're going by. They just make note writing kind of incidental. So you just go around your consult, it'll write the notes, and then you can double check it and save it. So interesting space, that one as well. And recently I've seen a company, they're starting to automate phone calls, which is pretty cool. Interesting regulatory barriers, I think. Like we've learned through our journey that when you communicate to a practitioner, the TGA regulation for us is a lower sort of level. But when you communicate advice, like medical advice, directly to a patient, that's a much higher sort of risk category. And so these sorts of companies will either have to not provide any dental advice, or they'll need to be regulated pretty strictly in case there's dental advice given to a patient and that represents the practice, which is a tricky one. But yeah, tons of innovation and opportunity coming up. So if you think of like I don't know, 10-year, 20-year sort of view, um, what does a dental practice look like? I think it's super hard to predict, but I really think that you got to work with your hands, have a provider number, or work with your hands. So the at-risk roles would be things like treatment coordinators, receptionists, those sorts of things. Um, yeah, but I think DAs and practitioners that do the doing in the surgery will be safe, hopefully, for our lifetimes until robotics comes in, that is. But hopefully that's not anytime soon. Um, cool. So that's the bulk of the presentation. Just to see if everybody's still awake. I want to do a little case study. So this one is from a very favorite book of mine called Nudge. Some of you might have seen this, but this book, and how this is relevant to us is like CodeTreat or AI. We're constantly nudging practitioners. Hey, is that caries? Oh, hey, is that bone loss? Like there's a whole bunch of nudges that AI will do for practitioners in the coming years and decades. But this book Nudge, it just really deep dives into the different types of nudges. Uh, Two basic types: opt-in, which is like you pretty much, yeah, like I'm not going to try to explain it. It's pretty self-explanatory. So opt in and opt out. A really good example is organ donation. So um, different countries have different policies around organ donation, and I would say Germany and Austria are similar sort of populations and demographics mindsets. But Germany, you actually have to write in and opt in case you have like a fatal near fatal event, that you give them permission to harvest your kidneys and I don't know why I use the word harvest, but but I don't know what the word is. Take your kidneys, liver, heart, whatever it is, right? And we know through the literature that Germany has tentatively a 12% opt-in rate. So Lauren, I'm not sure if we're gonna get our poll to work. Yay, it works. So I want you guys to have a guess. What is the current organ donation rate in Austria? Or the permission, gonna put this in air quotes, permission rate for organ donation. Leave that for another minute. Sorry, Lauren, I can't see the answers. Are some answers trickling in?
Yes, we've got 18 answers. We've
Oh,
got three saying 12%, seven saying 40, four saying 70, and four saying 99.
cool. So the answer is 99, which is kind of scary because there's that explicit consent. But that's the way it is, like there's clearly some winners in that, but what it is it's effective. Um, yeah. So depending on the requirements of the country and whatever it is, we know that default opt-in is a very, very powerful way. And how is this relevant? I would say like CodeTreat in the last like 18 months, what we've been doing is something similar to Germany. So we've been commenting on practitioners' treatment plans. So practitioner creates a treatment plan, and then we say, hey, there might be a different treatment option for this, or there might be some caries on this too. Do you want to opt in? And we've been getting pretty similar results to Germany, where a lot of the time practitioners just don't want to opt in for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they've already communicated their original finding to the patient, or the patient's gone, or whatever. It's hard to know. We're trying to find out, but we've been struggling with these like opt-in sort of nudges. So eventually what we're and this is super dangerous stuff, right? Like, because who gave us the authority to come up with treatment plans? So we're really trying to go from the academic evidence space and trying to include lots of researchers and practitioners to kind of figure out how the best way to do this is. But eventually, I think where we'll end up is this ability to create a treatment plan, and the dentist will pretty much have to opt out of it. And some of the early data from that is just like staggering. And this sort of Germany, Austria, yeah, difference, that's what we're kind of seeing internally as well. But we're going to take this slow and very cautious, because I think this is a dangerous game that we're trying to play in. Exciting, but also, yeah, like for Australia, there's clearly risks there, and we're very acutely aware of that. Cool. All right, I'm gonna move to my next case study. Uh, all right, this is a real favorite one of mine. Um, Hathaway Mills. So Berkshire Hathaway, Buffett. I'm sure many of you know that he started off owning a textile mill. So imagine Warren Buffett like creating cloth, as opposed to investing. But that's where he started. Um, anyway, he was really struggling with this industry and this factory specifically. It's really hard to make a buck, like losses, break even. But anyway, one day, I think maybe like late 60s, early 70s or something like that, a guy comes in and it's like, Warren, great news, great news. We have a machine that can produce cloth at 3 times the rate that our current machinery does. It's amazing news. This is going to save the factory. We can produce a whole bunch of cloth. And then Warren Buffett looks at the guy and what does he say? So that's the next poll, Lauren, if you could put it up. So yeah, does he ignore it, replace it?
I'll just give it another minute and tell you
Yeah.
what everyone's thinking. So we've got 13 answers at the moment. We've got two of them saying that he ignores it. We've got
Yeah.
one saying he replaces it.
Yeah.
Eight of them saying he buys a new machine to test it out first, and six of them saying he decides to shut down Hathaway Mills.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably doesn't help that Warren is no longer in the textile industry. Yeah, so the correct answer is he does decide to shut down Hathaway Mills. It takes him many years to kind of finally do it, but that was the sort of beginning of the end. And I think there are clear parallels to this sort of AI revolution. So let's kind of examine why Buffett decided to shut it down. So he looks at this guy and he says, "Oh boy, if that's true, I'm shutting it down." Why? Because number one, it's massive capital, more capital injection, right? Like you got to remove your existing infrastructure, got to spend a ton of money on this infrastructure. But the real clincher for Buffett is who benefits from this. Is it the provider or is it the consumer? So in this case, what Buffett immediately realizes is like there's going to be new textile mills opening up that will exclusively use these new machines, and that's going to have a effect on price. So price is going to come down. Um, so ultimately, in this scenario, Buffett's convinced that it's not the provider, not the manufacturer of the textile that benefits, but it's the consumer. It's the person that buys the. So it's like a lose situation for Buffett where he has to spend a bunch of money buying these new machines and then sell his cloth at an ever decreasing price. Um, so there's learnings from this, but also the kind of crazy thing about AI is there's no massive capital infrastructure to that because it's all essentially software and math. I don't think it's a like for like example, but I think it's really worthwhile for us as, you know, dentists, practice owners, industry participants to say this AI revolution is real, but how do we as practitioners, providers, you know, maintain or grow revenue, but most importantly, how do we make sure our margins don't shrink because the price that we sell our services at are ever diminishing. Um, yeah, so I think it's personally inevitable that the cost of dentistry will fall like in 10 plus years. I don't know, maybe it'll happen sooner. But yeah, obviously people that move first into this like AI transformation will benefit from being able to save on various expenses and have more efficient practices. Cool. So sorry, got to sales pitch this for a second. Um, Codry can do a lot of different things, but I think streamlining and service design, this is right in our wheelhouse. If you're interested, if you're starting that second practice, or if you want to optimize your current practice, there's lots of scenarios that we can help with. But I think the first step is just really understanding the situation. Um, yeah, so give Jan a phone call, or just visit our website and fill out the form. Yeah, I think it's a super exciting time. It's kind of the Wild West, but it's also like, there will be massive advantages, I think, to practices that adopt this technology early and figure out how to benefit from it. Yeah, so there's a ton of things that we can help with, but reach out and hopefully we can start a conversation, understand your situation, and see how we can help. Uh, cool. I think that's pretty much it. I'm gonna stop. Lauren, do we have any Q&A stuff lined up, or are we gonna?
Look, we don't have Q&A lined up. If you want to open it for Q&A, I'm sure we can.
Yeah.
Let me just, we don't have any open questions.
Cool.
So no, we don't
Okay.
have Q&A today, but look, I just wanted to say thanks, Max, obviously, for coming in today. It's been extremely insightful and motivating, and it's been a really inspiring, webinar for myself, and I'm sure for everyone who's joined today. I will be sending out an EDM after with the recording of the webinar for those who weren't able to make it, or should you wish to watch it again. So don't worry, you will be getting that webinar link shortly. But otherwise, it's been great. And yeah, I mean, we don't have any questions. However, if you want to finish it off with saying goodbye to everyone, then I
Yeah.
suppose that's the end of it.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Lauren. And hopefully our little pup Oreo didn't bother the webinar too
No, I
much.
loved
He was keep
Oreo.
barking and barking. Cool. No, thank you so much, guys, for facilitating this. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. All the best.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye now.
Max. Bye.
Ciao.